When you visit a natural history museum, you may have noticed that some of the dinosaurs on display are eerily complete, like the fearsome T-Rex, nicknamed Scotty, whose entire skeleton is 90% intact, or the herbivorous Myasora, whose fossilized body is almost completely whole. But most dinosaur fossils aren't like these specimens. Instead, they're represented by just a few bone fragments or even a single tooth. And that's for a good reason. Hi, it's me, and this is Minute Earth. Most organisms don't preserve in their entirety when they die. So finding a fossil that's completely intact is pretty darn rare. But that doesn't mean that's how fossils are usually formed. It's just that the fossilization process works to preserve certain parts of ancient organisms better than others. And in order to understand what those parts are, we need to learn about the steps that turn dead things into fossils in the first place. Step 1. Like a tree and fall down. When an animal like a dinosaur dies, its body will start to break down pretty quickly. Fungi, bacteria, and insects will start consuming the corpse almost immediately. Larger animals might leave the skeleton relatively intact, but even so, the elements will start eroding the bones. Depending on the environment, it can take months or even years for an animal's body to be completely decomposed. And throughout this decay, the skeleton will be broken into smaller and smaller pieces. But not all parts of the skeleton are created equal. Long bones, like femurs, break into smaller pieces that can get lost in the shuffle, so to speak. Flat bones like the ribs and shoulder blades tend to fracture into larger, heavier chunks. Those big pieces are called macro debris, and they're much more likely to get buried without being eroded away entirely. So if the conditions are right, you might find those flat bone fragments thousands of later, which is how paleontologists found Sue, the most complete Tyrannosaurus rex skeleton ever unearthed. But flat bones aren't the only things that get preserved as macrofossils. Sometimes a dinosaur gets buried so quickly that it retains its entire body, like the horned dinosaur named Wendy Sarotops in Canada. Even soft tissues like skin and feathers have been found intact in fossils. Fossils of dinosaurs that lived in very dry environments, like the Gobi Desert, have also retained their skin because there wasn't enough water for bacteria and fungi to grow and decompose them. Teeth are also particularly good at resisting decomposition. They're hard and metabolically inert, meaning the processes that build up teeth don't rely on the organism being alive. So teeth can last hundreds of millions of years, and they're often found as microfossils, which are fossils smaller than a sesame seed. And microfossils aren't just teeth. They can also be microscopic algae or the hard outer shells of tiny animals. Since they're so small, they're easy to overlook. But their small size is actually an advantage. Microfossils are lightweight enough to be carried by wind currents and water, meaning they can travel huge distances from where the organism originally lived. So scientists use them to identify what types of animals and plants were living in an area long ago, even if they can't find any actual fossils. Now, while some dinosaurs have been mostly intact since they died, like Wendy, most of them are missing a few key components, including their skulls. See, the skull is made of lots of small bones held together by connective tissue. So when a dino dies and its body decays, gravity breaks up the skull and scatters the pieces. All of this fragmentation means that most dinosaurs are only known from a few bone fragments, which makes it harder to study their anatomy. But it also means that some parts of dinosaurs are way more common in the fossil record than others, like their jawbones. And not all dinosaur parts decay at the same rate either. A study published in 2013 estimated that a saurian's ribs would degrade 40 times faster than their hip bones, which have a lot more calcium. And in general, scientists have found that cartilage, which is made of calcium as well, preserves way better than other types of bone. So if a dinosaur had a large amount of cartilage in a particular joint, like in their knees, then that joint has a much better chance of being preserved than other types of joints. Finally, once a dead dino has been broken down into smaller pieces, it still needs to become a fossil. And this step can take tens of thousands of years. Over time, groundwater seeps into the pores of the bones and replaces the minerals in them with minerals dissolved in the water, like silica or calcite. These new minerals form a hard rock called chert. This process turns the bone into what's called a replacement fossil, which looks exactly like the original bone. Sometimes, though, instead of replacing the bone, the minerals fill in the empty space left after the bone has completely decayed. In that case, you end up with a mold or cast fossil. All of these fossilization processes are rare. As it is, it's estimated that for every 10,000 animals that die, only one of them becomes a fossil. But just because something doesn't preserve well doesn't mean that it never preserves. Take feathers, for instance. We know that some dinosaurs had feathers, but we rarely find them in the fossil record because they're made of keratin, which doesn't fossilize well. But in 2010, scientists found exceptionally well-preserved fossils of Ankylosaurus, a kind of dinosaur that likely had feathers. They found these fossils in southern Germany, which turned out to be a gold mine for feathered dinosaur fossils. The team hypothesized that the acidic soils in the area prevented the minerals that normally replace bones from doing their thing, preserving the feathers as casts instead. Even with the best preservation conditions, fossilization is a matter of chance. If a dinosaur died in an area where its body was quickly buried, like in a volcanic eruption or a torrent of mud that scientists call a debris flow, then it might preserve in a more intact state. And sometimes it comes down to just being in the right place at the right time. For example, Scotty, the well-preserved T-Rex, was likely killed in a river crossing when it got caught up in a debris flow. Then it sat in a bog for a few years until it was completely covered in sediment, protecting its body from scavengers and ensuring its survival through time. In fact, Scotty's fossil was discovered only because the ground above it collapsed, exposing its skeleton. And if that hadn't happened, who knows how many more years we would have had to wait to find him. But regardless of whether they're complete skeletons or just a few fragments, all fossils help us piece together the history of life on Earth. So next time you're looking at a dinosaur fossil, no matter how complete it is, remember that it's a miracle of science. Thanks for watching this episode of Minute Earth.